There we go. Thank you.
Should we also designate a host for each meeting?
Well, we
I
have
don't
two
know how that.
co-chairs. Yeah.
That's
So,
true. Okay. Well, Divya's typing, so I guess I will help sharper the meeting along. Okay, so welcome to today's June 4th Bytecode Alliance SIG community meeting. It's our first meeting. And this meeting is being recorded, and that was actually our first agenda item. We talked about it on the non-recorded part of this meeting, and we will now reiterate what we think is the best path forward. So going forward with our meetings, as people join, we will eventually hit the record button and remind people that the meeting is being recorded, and if they want to turn off their cameras, that they're totally welcome to do so. So yeah, I think that is the summary of our conversation on recording meetings for this group going forward. And if anyone has any thoughts, you're totally welcome to resurface this at the next meeting. Yeah. Okay, if anyone has anything else to add right now, feel free. Otherwise, we can figure out and address our next agenda item. All right. Tivia, did you have one?
yeah. So I do. I had a couple, and for
Okay.
Leon's perspective, hello, Leon. I'm David Bryan. I'm the consulting executive director of the Bytecode Alliance, and I have a personal and professional interest in community and community outreach, and have done that in the past in my career. I Apart from that, I'm trying to help Karen and Divya get SIG Community started, and there's a bunch of operational stuff that we've been working on to do that, like this meeting. So I'm kind of wearing two hats at this point. One is kind of helping make sure we get everything set up smoothly so that you all have everything you need from an alliance perspective, and the other one is just kind of curiosity about how we feel with the scope and sweep of work that we might do as SIG Community. And in that latter category, I think the point I was going to make was that a lot of what we've done to get the word out in some way, shape, or form has been motivated when projects say, okay, well, we've got a new release of Wasm Time or whatever, and we'd like to tell people about it. And so they write a blog post and we post that on our website. And I think one of the things we haven't really had is a place where we would say, okay, well, what would be good for the community from a community perspective, not from a project perspective? What kind of information would we like to get out there? What kind of things would the community like to, what tools or knowledge or whatever would like to have and what would like to know? And I think we would welcome, again, now wearing my Bytecode Alliance hat, we would welcome more content on the website, blog posts, etc., sort of rooted in that perspective. It's like, well, there's a lot of curiosity out there about the component model or whatever. And so, sourcing some ideas to create content and so using mechanisms we already have as a channel for SIG Community and knowing that SIG Community is thinking about those things and can enrich the stream of things that we post or publish by having it be community facing or community centered rather than have it be, Project X has hit milestone Y and they'd like to make a blog post about it. So that was kind of one sort of collective thought about that. Oh, and somebody else is going to join. Hang on a second. Oops. Well, they were. Anyway, that was my one sort of open-ended question was collectively, this feels like a good place to have that conversation. And so I just wanted to highlight that there's an opportunity. If there are things like that this group would like to do as a special interest group, we can figure out how to use any of our existing mechanisms or whatever to benefit.
Just to try to recap what you said and make sure that I read that or that I understood that correctly, are you asking for for this to be the forum in which people would help brainstorm content that they think would be useful for the community to know?
Or not, news, articles, information, that sort of
But
thing.
like topics, right?
Yeah, right. That would
Okay.
be, rooted in a perception or this working group's perception about things that would be good for us to put out there for the community as part of overall outreach. So it's mostly just a question and an open offer from the Alliance's perspective is if that's the kind of thing that seems useful at some point, I think we can find ways to do that. And it would, generally speaking, I think, enrich the material that we're providing because we would have content or information or blog posts or whatever that would be motivated by thinking about it from the perspective of what would we like the community to have.
Yeah, I'm wondering if it would make sense to just have like a specific part of the agenda be like a prompt every meeting to be like to like revisit that brainstorming and then have it feed into something like a Google Sheet that's just like a backlog of ideas. That's just one idea, at least like logistics wise. Yeah, because I think if we like prompt everyone every week, that might be more useful. Yeah. But then we
And
would
some of
have
that,
to make it very clear that like we're looking for this content from people.
and some of that discussion could happen in the Zulip channel, for example. Doesn't have to wait for the meeting. But I think,
True.
there's a good idea to periodically prompt that or whatever, jog our memories so that we can pull something out that happened over the course of the 2 weeks since the last meeting and add that to the backlog.
Um, what is the idea that like the SIG would just help kind of manage that stuff? I guess like how should we think about like getting people to actually execute on these things? And is that like an ask that we as a SIG can make, right? Because I guess like if we're like looking for specific content on the topic, someone would ultimately have to write that, right?
Yeah, I mean, personally, and I'm interested in other people's thoughts, I wouldn't want to stifle the good thinking by automatically assuming that the person that suggests the thing is going to have to actually do it. I think at the moment we don't have a collection of people that's thinking about it from the holistic community perspective. And so even if all we did was identify gaps or build a backlog without necessarily feeling like, well, you suggested it, so I guess you're going to write the blog post, right? I mean, if you're just building the backlog seems like a useful thing to do, and then we could prioritize them or, go check in with another SIG or a project or something and figure out what was the appropriate thing to do. But I wouldn't want to. It seems like a good first step is to identify things that would be helpful to the community in the large, and then we can separately prioritize them and figure out how to do them or who could do them. It might not even be us. So. But I think we've seen some discussion in some of the Zulip channels where people have asked questions and they're like, I'm not sure I understand how to do this. Or, um, you know, is there a way, I'm curious about this, that, or the other thing. And so I think gathering those perspectives and finding a way to follow up on them from a community perspective feels like a good thing to do. So thank you. Yeah. That was one of my hopes, is that we could find a place to make that investment.
I think as a follow-up topic, should we talk about like our social media channels available to use right now? And if there's anything, like if there are any gaps we feel like need to be filled? Um, yeah. So I think right now there's like the YouTube channel. You had mentioned Twitter, and there's like an Eventbrite account for when we do in-person events. Are there any other ones?
Those are the
LinkedIn?
primary ones. I mean, we have the blog post on the website, but that's not really social media. That's just a way of getting information out. And then Zulip. I think most conversation, just based on historically my perspective, most of the conversation seems to happen on Zulip more so than it does on social media. Some projects, there are other resources that the W3C community group has that they use. There's a Discord somewhere, et cetera. So there are other more project centric mechanisms, but the ones that have largely been affiliated with the Alliance have been those: Twitter, the community YouTube channel, which is mostly used for our monthly community YouTube stream that Bailey Hayes coordinates, but also for the recordings that the SIGs create of their various meetings and activities. So those are the primary ones. And again, we've had some more, let's say, reactive social media strategy than we've had proactive. So it's largely been event driven. So we tweeted, for example, around WasmCon last September, etc. So I think there's both the opportunity to do more with those mechanisms, but then also if there are other tools that we should have, especially from a community facing perspective, then we should add them to the list and figure out how to go do them.
Is there like a workflow if one of the SIGs has something that they want to share? Like, how does that, like, if they have some news or updates or whatnot, like, what does that currently look like?
Sure. So sort of the baseline mechanism for SIGs in particular, but we also use it for the TSC, is to post meeting related material in the meetings repo that we have on GitHub. And so meeting agendas are there, meeting minutes are there. If somebody comes and gives a great presentation, we put the slides there. Then the video recording is uploaded to YouTube, to the YouTube channel. And so those are that's the baseline mechanism. And then if something in particular happens that a SIG, let's say, wants to call attention to, then we figure out which of our, kind of a case by case basis. Most of examples of that have been blog posts that have been either posted just on our site or have been posted someplace else, but then we summarize them and linked to them in a post on the bytecodealliance.org site. So probably the second tier of that has been through those news posts under the news post on our website.
And do the co-chairs from those SIGs do it, or is it like, or just like someone gets assigned to do it?
Well, the meeting minutes is usually done on a rotating basis. So whoever graciously volunteers to take the minutes is usually the person that takes care of putting them together in a markdown document and then submitting a pull request to merge them into that particular SIG subfolder in the meetings repo. And so that's been the model for that. We have like the TSC, for example, often proactively solicits or gets shepherds posts on the website. So when we adopt a new hosted project, for example, they'll work with the hosted projects folks to write a post about it and post it on the website. So it's on a case by case basis that those things come up, and then we coordinate them as appropriate. So we haven't, for example, maintained an editorial calendar and said, okay, well, this month we're going to post articles about this and that, and then next month we're going to post an article about that. So that model we haven't. It's mostly been as opportunities arise, or we feel like something's happened and we need to, we had one of our Plumber Summit events and we wanted to post some news about it. So that's generally been the low touch model for that kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't think you need a content calendar situation yet.
Well, I mean, I have worked in developer outreach organizations where that was a thing, right? And we managed that, and you looked at the product roadmap and the releases and whatever, and you sort of had month by month the calendar. And I agree, I don't think we're there yet. But I think it's also good. We could benefit probably from people thinking more about that as they're doing things. It's like, okay, well, here's an interesting thing, and oh yeah, we should get the word out. So, and then we'd use one of our readily available mechanisms to do that.
I have a thing here. Again, we're not there yet, I agree, but I also think it's important that we establish, to Karen's point of not having this broadcasting of important communications, and it's not readily available. Like I know that there's a GitHub repo with a markdown meeting minutes file, and there's a presentation uploaded there. But to be really honest, it would require somebody from the SIG actually going and checking those out in general to actually understand if there is something worthy of a blog post or worthy of communication to the broader audience. So I know this is probably very early on to suggest this, but I think there should be some sort of streamlining in terms of the way we actually get that information. I don't know how at this point it would work, but given that we are thinking about helping with outreach in general, it would make sense to have that as a streamlined process, like a place where people can come and tell us that, hey, you know what, we need this amplified, or hey, you know what, this is an interesting thing that we're doing and we'd like more contributors, or maybe this is a new feature that's come out. So it would be easier for us to do that, but rather than go search through each meeting meeting minute or whatever, or presentation. I know that you all are doing it for some of the SIGs, but having like that process set up eventually obviously would really help, in my opinion. And I know that our discussions are towards that, but I just wanted to put it out there if it wasn't.
No, and when you said us in that context, did you mean us, SIG Community, us, or, you know, for us to do that? I think there's an opportunity for us to take a role, us, SIG Community, us to take a role there. And I just, to clarify the point you were making, was my question. So
That's a very good question. Honestly speaking, outreach, I think, is again, correct me if I'm wrong, Karen. I think it's one of the things that we want to focus on. So maybe it is one of the things we want to look at eventually. But it's again important to the wider aspect of us as SIG community actually building a community around the Bytecode Alliance, right? Because if even if people are coming in as contributors, they are coming in as uh, new faces into the community, and this is the first call that they attend. And documentation is not the first call. So assuming that they attend, this is the first call. There are areas that we've outlined, but there aren't that many areas that we can point them to, because in others projects that I've worked with, contributor experience and contributor strategy in general are the ones, and Karen's got a ton of experience there since she helped set that up as well. So those are the ones that sort of lay guidelines around this. So sure, we definitely can do this, but also I think it's important to the wider goal of us integrating newer contributors and helping them improve their experience within the community as well. So there's there's two sides to that answer. So I think it's important, but I don't know whether it's an immediate goal that we want to target or a later goal. Because again, chicken and egg situation, we don't have that many contributors to actually look at it. But also it's important. So what comes first?
yeah, and I think Leon had a couple of questions in chat. So I think the answer to the second question is no, in the sense that that list of projects that you pointed out, Leon, are the hosted projects for the Bytecode Alliance. And if you look, there's a broader range of activity. Yeah, so there's the hosted projects, which are kind of a more central collection, smaller number of central collection of things. But there's a wider range of activities that are happening. There are other repositories managed under the Bytecode Alliance organization for lots of other things. And so I don't think SIG Community necessarily has to limit the scope of what it does to understanding and meeting the needs of the community just around our hosted projects. I think it could be broader than that. I think that's a topic for this group to sort out, but I don't think from a what got approved and what are we supposed to be doing perspective, the expectation is that it's just about the hosted projects, the Bytecode Alliance hosted projects.
Oh yeah. Also just a question is like, so when we say we want to amplify things, is it like newer things that's happening, or is it mostly just the stuff that's existing? Is there something wrong with my mic? Vincent?
You're a little muffled. I think it helps when you talk closer to it.
Yeah, it's the noise cancellation, so it's sometimes there's a fan
It's better
running
now.
above me.
Oh.
Yeah,
Can you
it's
repeat
sort
what you
of.
said?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask that if we are amplifying things, right? Are we doing it for the existing like articles that are present like around WASM, or are we like thinking of doing completely new like upcoming articles that are like coming towards us basically?
You're
Uh,
muted, David.
yeah, yeah, mute.
I mean, I have a personal opinion, and I think my personal opinion is, and I guess this is vague, but I think my personal opinion is we should have a sense for what we mean, what do we think of the Bytecode Alliance community being, and the central perspective should be what do we think best serves the needs of that community, and then we would go from there. So if we had a sense that there was some new activity that was happening, maybe around the edges of what may be more visible as the Bytecode Alliance community that we wanted to call more attention to, then great. We should figure out how to do that. If we felt like the thing the community needed was more hands-on events and less documentation, then we could go figure out how to do more hands-on events. And so I think it's less about I would probably personally prioritize working from the perspective of the community and what we think it is and what it needs to start with, and then map from there into, well, how does that relate to our existing projects or, existing events that we're planning to participate in or be a part of. And so instead of, trying to put more community flavoring on everything, running around and looking at it, it's like have a sense of what community we're trying to engender and nurture, and then figure out, well, what do they want? I don't know. We do a survey or something, and we figure it out, and we don't have to confine ourselves to a small set of things. We can work from the community's perspective, our sense of community. So, again, that's just my opinion. I don't think there wasn't with the conversation we had that Karen and Divya had with the TSC. I don't think had a lot of that particular flavoring to it. I don't know. You all can say, but I think it's an open question for us to figure out, and we have the license to go do that. Does that help, Divya? Does that answer your question? Or, I mean, I agree with you in general that we should think as broadly as we can and think about, have a sense of community, which maybe we don't necessarily have yet. Sort of what do we mean when we say community? And then work from the perspective of what we think is most helpful there. Independent of whether it's, maybe the first 5 things we do don't have anything to do with a component model, even though there's a tremendous amount of the technical work that's happening inside the Alliance now is around the component model. And if we felt that that was the right thing to do from a community perspective, then sure. As an example.
Would it help guide this conversation? I feel like there's like a lot we could include. Would it help guide the conversation if we went in the direction of like what we don't want to include, I guess? Yeah.
Do you have examples?
That's what I wouldn't include. Yeah. I mean, I guess like in general, when I think about like communications coming from a foundation, like I would not expect to see something amplified if it was like about a member company's paid product, I think is an example of something that I would not include. But then if they had a project, especially like something that is in the Bytecode Alliance, then I would feel comfortable amplifying that if it was phrased in like a neutral way.
Yeah, there has been regular conversation about being vendor neutral was the term that has tended to be used, and trying to be vendor neutral. So I think being vendor neutral or not being not vendor neutral is a good parameter.
Would it help if we actually came up with guidelines around this, like the question that Karen asked, as like an outcome of this meeting, rather than figuring out the logistics around this without. So we're trying to shoot at the dartboard without having the lights on, which is pretty dangerous, I think. So we should
I think it's a
probably
great
put-
suggestion. Yeah, to suggest, while we're still figuring out exactly what we do mean when we say community, we can say some things that we don't mean, and here's what they are. So that would definitely be helpful. And we could ask some test questions and then put the answers in the in or out category based on what we collectively think. So to Karen's point, I think, things like, the Bytecode Alliance is going to have an election later in the year for directors. Obviously that's on the Bytecode Alliance to manage that and message that. And that's not, so specifically Bytecode Alliance operational things would be left to the Bytecode Alliance to do. And with my executive director hat on, that's my job. So yeah, I think that's another boundary that we can say, we kind of, or we're not going to do that kind of thing. We're not going to attempt to recruit more members for the Bytecode Alliance, for example. So. On the other hand, the Bytecode Alliance is co-sponsoring WASMCon in November, and that might very well be community things we would do with the SIG community would do. To plug into that event or be part of it or support it. So those kinds of events might very well be in scope for our work.
We just brain-dump things we think can or should go out on like our official mediums. How do we feel about like amplifying the various SIGs meetings? Like whether it's like every week we say something like, hey, these are the meetings for the week, or we can do this like every other week. I don't know that all the SIGs are necessarily looking for more participation. Which we can obviously check with them, but I think, yeah, even just like a recap of upcoming meetings, which I think we can like try and condense down to like one tweet covering, however many meetings coming up. I think that could be super useful if we're just looking for community engagement. I think that one's low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, in a way, maybe we think about that too, to tie things together, is to say that SIG Community is primarily orchestrating things with respect to our calendar, our public calendar. And the making sure that all of the SIG meetings and whatnot are in that calendar and people know that calendar exists and they can look at it and whatnot is definitely a good SIG community thing. And that helps without necessarily obliging SIG community to, tweet that the minutes of SIG whatever have been posted into the repo or whatever. And so it can be more orchestrated around the calendar than around the meetings or something. But
yeah, I guess I'm just thinking of it right now, or like SIG community is helping, facilitate the amplification of what each of the other SIGs are doing. Yeah, I guess like amplification and then like yeah, of like SIG activities, and then I guess just like also like a focus on like content that is like yeah, focused on education is what I'm thinking. Whether it's like educating people about the news or how to do something, or yeah. Um, are there any other scopes we can think of? Because I want to like, yeah, I guess there's like making the distinction that like we're not necessarily here to like, or I mean, we can have this conversation where it's like, do we want to be a mechanism for marketing, or like, is this all around, you know, just amplifying views and education? Like, yeah, how do we think about community in this aspect?
Maybe I don't know if this is a thing that's followed in Bytecode Alliance, but it has versions in almost all the projects that I've worked with. Maybe we actually do come up with a charter. I don't know. It normally helps. It at least normally helps me. I don't know about everybody else, but knowing what's in scope, what's out of scope, what are our goals. I mean, we have that somewhat already in the proposal document outlined. But when we have these conversations, right? I know that new ideas pop up during these conversations, and the meetings minutes do help them. Do help facilitate more of these conversations and keep a record of them, but we necessarily might be not heading in the right direction, or in the wrong direction, or whatever direction. We may not have a direction in the first place if we don't know what we're targeting. So I think having like the goal, and what's in scope and what's out of scope really helps me define it. I don't know your thoughts about it, but it personally helps me to know what my North Star is, rather than, just aimlessly talk about um, things. I love a good discussion, but again, this has to mean something when it comes to the larger scope of things that we're doing for the SIG. So, and for the community that we're building around WebAssembly. So I think having like a charter could be a good starting point, but I would also want to know your thoughts on it.
I think having a charter would be great. I think having a maybe a short list of goals, by the end of the year, we'd like to do A, B, and C or whatever would be helpful. I think it's fine for us to start small, and, get more ambitious over time. So as much as there might be a large number of things we could do under the community outreach perspective, picking a reasonable starting point to tackle also feels like a reasonable thing to do, rather than so that if the charter is both sort of sets direction or gives us a navigational perspective, but also doesn't, it lets us start small and grow over time, then I think that would be great.
Yeah, like we refine it as we go. Like obviously it's not going to be set in stone. I don't intend for it to be set in stone. But also starting off with this basic scope of what we can do given the current strength, and what is our direction for the next couple of months, and what do we aim to sort of achieve, and if we do end up creating something, what do we aim to maintain, would be a good starting point, rather than like talking about this in every meeting. And like coming up with that would be helpful in my opinion.
can we like just start a Google Doc and like start like commenting and like, yeah, I'm just trying to figure out like where we would do this. Because yeah, I feel like if we're just on a call, we're gonna keep like talking in circles. And yeah.
The Zulip channel so that, I mean, again, once we have something ready, we can share it. I'm not saying that we can share it right away. But once we have something, we can definitely share it for comments and any other suggestions that people might have around what the SIG should be doing.
Yeah, and by way of comparison, some other SIGs and working groups use HackMD as a collaborative document editing tool as an alternative to Google Docs. So a brainstorming document somewhere could be fine and helpful. And Leon posted a thing in chat about what Tag Wasm is doing, which I was just looking at, and their approach to looks very similar to what some of our other SIGs do in terms of agenda, meeting notes, recording link, etc. Just in a different repository. This is in a Google document rather than in a GitHub repo. So. Maybe one other topic. So our next meeting is in 2 weeks. Are there things that we want to try and accomplish? We're working offline on this brainstorming charter would be one thing. Other things, carrying some of this discussion over into Zulip, maybe. Anything else that we want to plant seeds now so that we talk about them in more detail maybe 2 weeks from now? Just a thought for another topic for today. Any homework you want to give us?
So we also talked about guidelines. Do we want to tackle that right now or would it be later on? I'm okay with either. It's just that I'm going through the notes and that was another thing. So I brought it up. Do we want to do that later on or do we want to tackle it in the next couple of weeks? Like priority wise, I think having a North Star is more important. Not gonna say no, but what are other people's thoughts on this?
Sure, let's work on scope. How do we feel about just starting with the scope of, I guess, I feel like there's always like two perspectives of this. It's like the perspective from the community, like trying to get information from the Bytecode Alliance, or the perspective of getting information out from the Bytecode Alliance. Like, Justin said internal, external. Can you, Justin, would you mind expanding on that? Do you mean like external to like outside of the Bytecode Alliance, like space, or
Sorry, I've been hopping through different meetings in the background. I'm still quite new here and I was quite late to this meeting, so I feel like I don't have a ton of context to contribute. But with regards to what I've heard so far with guidelines and whether that's internal or external guidelines for, like, what you mentioned about promoting, a proprietary solution for one company. or internal guidelines regarding like how many people can be on the board from one or two companies, right? So kind of keeping the guardrails in place for the future trajectory to be successful of SIG Community. Yeah, I feel like I can comment a lot on a Google Sheet, but probably not too well right now. Sorry.
You were talking more, Karen, about overall scope for SIG Community. Is that what you were thinking?
At least like just like whatever we feel like is reasonable to tackle first. Yeah. Like if yeah. Because right now I feel like it could be easy to try to organize our thoughts on just figuring out what the low-hanging fruit would be if our goal was to amplify what the foundation and its existing SIGs are doing, like their activities, and then share that outwards. So that was, I guess, a proportion of what I would imagine would be like part of the larger scope, but one that we could clearly try and work on right now.
Do you think it's practical for us to be able to get to a point where we could identify a short list of needs that we feel like the community has?
Yeah, that would
I
make
sort of feel
sense.
like you could look at what we don't. I'll go out on a limb. I don't think we would claim that we necessarily have an organized sense of community today. We have a community. It's a very rich, diverse, and multifaceted community, but we have a community of activities going on. But I don't think we have any kind of central perspective about that. And so I don't know that we necessarily could say, well, from a community perspective, 3 things we're doing really well are the following, and 3 things that we definitely feel like are needs that the community has that we'd like to figure out how to meet are the following. And so I feel like, we could do any of a number of things, to your point. We just want to make sure we're doing meaningful and impactful things, and things, as Divya was pointing out, that help us move in some direction over time and accomplish things, a larger and growing sense of things over time. But I don't know how practical it is to feel like we could assess those things. What do we think the community needs? What are the needs that should most immediately be met? And what are strengths that we have that we should take advantage of? But I don't know how practical it is to get a handle on those things.
I mean, I think any work done is like good work. So I feel like when it makes sense to just like brain dump anything that we think this group could do, and then see if there are any like larger themes that emerge from there. Yeah, and then hopefully that can help us figure out our North Star. I guess, yeah, it's kind of like working backwards, but I think if there are apparent things and apparent holes to fill, I think then that I think gives us like actual purpose or like clear purpose, right? Yeah.
Yeah, well, that brainstorming suggestion feels like a better thing to do than just send out a survey, right? That's like,
Yeah.
Tell us what 3 things you think we should do. Does it feel like a good thing? So starting with a brainstorm and seeing if patterns emerge, or clusters of activities show up.
Is that something you think we could, is there like, or I guess like I'm assuming there should be one higher level channel in the Zulip where we can ask a question like this, because there's not a lot of people hanging out in the SIG community yet, right? So
Well, we have general, so I think the thing we could do
yeah,
is we could make a post to the general channel saying, hey, SIG community is up and running. We had our first meeting. We got our own Zulip channel. Discussions are going to start happening over there about the community and what the community needs and likes, and come and join us, and then we could have multiple streams inside SIG community for stuff, and pull people in and have conversation there. So
are you saying to point people in general to SIG community to then share what they think what they like, or like what asks they have for the brain dump, or do you think
just to call people's attention to the SIG community stream on Zulip in general, which all 2,000 plus people would see, and then we won't, some number of them will wander over and can engage in conversations there, and then we can have multiple streams there, topically, and not have to percolate them back into general, for example.
Yeah. Justin just posted in chat a example statement, mission statement, which is amplify WASM SIG work both internally and between SIGs and externally to people who haven't discovered WASM. I guess there's also I think we don't want to limit ourselves to SIGs because they're I guess there's more than the SIGs, right? I guess I'm thinking of just if any news comes out of the TOC, that would probably be something we want to help. Would it be something we would want to help amplify? So I'm a little hesitant to explicitly say SIG work.
Well, yeah, and I took and externally to people who haven't discovered WASM to mean broadly across, a wide variety of not SIG stuff too. So it's externally, broad community, no real boundaries. It's everybody that's interested in and active in WebAssembly as we see it in the landscape. And then also that's maybe to Justin's internal external point, was kind of the external broadly to everybody that's interested in WebAssembly, and then internally in the sense that it's facilitating some of this across. For example, we might surface some stuff in SIG community that we'd want to send emissaries over to SIG documentation and say, hey, SIG documentation people, it would be awesome to have some documentation about blah, or better examples, or I don't know, whatever. And I see Justin's thumbs up. And so you could imagine both the broader external and then also the facilitative internal, all happening as part of that mission. Excuse me.
Yeah, there's an opportunity. So I've been hovering around WebAssembly since 2018, and I have gone and just searched through all the different groups working on the different types of projects that are hitting different areas of compute that I find interesting. There is this unspoken element that tends to happen where someone is working on a problem in one domain space that maps to another, but they're not aware of each other. So if I can facilitate either that cross-pollination between SIGs, and maybe sharing, I don't know if it's sharing brain space, but sharing mind share of the type of work going on, that's all relationship building, which is building community and building better products. And it makes the community feel like a place where you belong a little bit. So it's a healthy function. So I guess my main question in my mind is, what is the minimum, most important function of what SIG community could be to both internal, other SIGs, other WebAssembly projects, and external people who don't know WebAssembly, people who are starting their own startup to solve this need. Xtism is a good example. There's a huge need in debugging WebAssembly, and almost no one else has done anything substantive that I'm aware of outside of extism. And I feel like they've kind of bent, I don't know if they've bent over backwards, but I feel like they've done a lot of work that should be celebrated in that debugging WebAssembly space for others. So I'm sorry if I'm just kind of repeating a bunch of stuff that's been said before.
I thought that was super helpful, so thanks for sharing. Um, I guess I don't want to like. Are we at time, by the way? Like, should we... You're muted, David.
I guess it depends on your definition of that time. I think the calendar appointment for this meeting was 30 minutes, which is what we had talked about, but we have run over. Zoom's going to keep recording until we stop. But people may have other things they need to go and do. And so we could maybe quickly tie up some of these things and talk about between now and our next meeting, and then at the next meeting in 2 weeks, where we want to try and get things accomplished. So. But it sounds like the mission statement, sort of goals, direction, charter, brainstorming, it seems like one activity of interest, which could also include articulating things we're pretty comfortable that we're not going to do, or boundaries that we feel like we're not going to cross. And then the other one is just actions we'll take to kind of make people more aware of SIG Community in Zula primarily, and get them engaged, so we have more folks at the next meeting.
I feel like that's a good stopping point, because I think, yeah, I think we kind of need some examples of what of what service, or like what, or like how we can serve the community. And yeah, I would really love to like kind of crowdsource that. So I think, I mean, I'm happy to post in Zulip and kind of be like, go over to general and be like, hey, we exist. Like, let us know what you think about like what you would love to see this group help with. And I feel like that's kind of like the first step before we can like bother kind of thinking about anything else. Yeah.
I think that's a good first step towards, assessing our North Star. So yeah, I think we should do that. And hey, we might even get more than 5 people for the next meeting if we do that. So
That is pretty good for a first meeting. Not gonna lie.
yeah, I've had 0 people turn up, and this is like the best meeting ever. So like I have been on a meeting for another project, and it was literally just me and the other facilitator there, and we spoke for like 30 minutes, just the both of us, because nobody else turned up. But yeah, this is a great meeting. One of the best first meetings I've had in the recent past.
All right, so we've set a bar for the second meeting then.
Yeah. At least one more person.
one more person, and maybe we'll keep to time.
Yes, that too.
All right, that sounds good. So 2 weeks, same time, 3:30 GMT, 15:30 GMT.
Yep.
Good. All right. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Looking forward to talking more.
Thank you so much,
Thanks.
David. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, y'all.